The rain hammered against the glass windows of Marcello's, the most elegant Italian restaurant on Fifth Avenue. As Daniel stood frozen on the sidewalk outside, his hand trembling over the brass door handle. Inside, through the warm golden glow, he could see her, Emma, sitting at their reserved table, wearing the emerald dress she'd been saving for months, her eyes bright with anticipation as she checked her phone for the third time. Daniel's throat tightened as he looked down at his wallet, knowing that inside it held exactly $43.17. The prix-fixe menu alone cost $85 per person, not including drinks, tax, or tip. He had made a terrible, crushing mistake, and now the woman he loved more than life itself was about to discover that the man who had promised her a special anniversary dinner couldn't even afford the appetizers. If you believe in the power of kindness, in second chances, and in the moments that restore our faith in humanity, please take a moment to like this video. Leave a comment about a time someone showed you unexpected compassion. Share this story with someone who needs hope today. And subscribe to our channel so we can continue bringing you stories that touch the soul and remind us what truly matters in this world. Daniel had been planning this evening for 6 months, ever since Emma had mentioned in passing that Marcello's was where her parents had celebrated their 25th anniversary, where her father had held her mother's hand across the white tablecloth and told her that she was still the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. Emma had gotten tears in her eyes telling that story, and Daniel had made a silent promise to himself that when their own anniversary came around, he would take her to that same restaurant, give her that same magical experience, show her that he could be the kind of man her father was. He had been saving carefully, setting aside money from each paycheck at his job as a junior accountant at a small firm downtown. The numbers had been adding up nicely until 3 weeks ago, when his mother had called from Ohio, her voice breaking as she explained that his father's cancer treatment wasn't covered by insurance, that they were facing bills that would bury them, that she didn't know what else to do. Daniel hadn't hesitated for even a second. He had transferred nearly his entire savings to his parents' account that same day, telling his mother not to worry, that everything would be fine, that family came first. He had meant every word, but he hadn't told Emma, hadn't wanted to burden her with his family's troubles when she was dealing with her own stress at the hospital, where she worked as a pediatric nurse. He had convinced himself he could make it work somehow, that he'd figure something out before their anniversary arrived. But time had moved like water through his fingers, and now here he was, standing in the rain, watching his carefully constructed dream crumble around him. The shame burned through his chest like acid. Emma deserved so much better than this. Better than a boyfriend who made promises he couldn't keep, who brought her to expensive restaurants and then had to confess he couldn't pay for the meal. He thought about turning around, about texting her some excuse about getting sick or having an emergency at work. But the thought of disappointing her, of seeing the confusion and hurt in her eyes, felt even worse than the humiliation he was about to endure. So Daniel took a deep breath, pushed open the heavy door, and stepped inside, the warmth of the restaurant washing over him like a wave. Emma's face lit up the moment she saw him, and that smile, that beautiful, radiant smile, made his heart break into even smaller pieces. She stood up, smoothing her dress, and he crossed the restaurant toward her, feeling like a man walking toward his own execution. She kissed his cheek and told him he looked handsome, even though he was wearing his only good suit, the one that was slightly too big in the shoulders because he'd lost weight from stress. They sat down, and the waiter appeared immediately, tall and elegant in his crisp white shirt and black vest, presenting them with leather-bound menus and describing the evening's specials in a practiced, melodious voice. Daniel opened his menu, the prices swimming before his eyes like accusatory fingers pointing at his failure. Emma was glowing, talking about her day, about a little boy on her ward who had finally smiled after weeks of treatment, about how she'd been looking forward to this evening all week. Daniel felt like he was drowning, the words building up in his throat, the confession he needed to make choking him from the inside. But before he could speak, before he could destroy everything with his truth, the waiter returned with something unexpected. He was carrying a bottle of wine, expensive looking, with an ornate label that Daniel couldn't quite read. The waiter smiled warmly and said that the bottle was compliments of the house, that Marcello's liked to celebrate special occasions, and had they mentioned when making the reservation that this was their anniversary? Emma laughed, delighted, saying she hadn't mentioned it, but that yes, it was, and wasn't this wonderful? Daniel stared at the bottle, confusion mixing with his panic. But before he could process what was happening, the waiter was pouring the wine and suggesting some dishes that he said were particularly excellent tonight. Then the waiter did something strange. He met Daniel's eyes directly, and there was something in that look, something knowing and gentle, that made Daniel's breath catch in his throat. Throughout the evening, one unusual thing after another occurred. The waiter brought them an appetizer they hadn't ordered, explaining it was a new recipe the chef wanted special guests to try. The portions of their main courses were notably larger than what Daniel could see on neighboring tables. A dessert appeared, spectacular and elaborate, which the waiter said was being featured in a food magazine, and they were selected to sample it for feedback. Emma was enchanted by everything, holding Daniel's hand across the table, telling him this was the most perfect evening she could have imagined, that she felt like a princess in a fairy tale. Daniel felt increasingly disoriented, unable to understand what was happening, but too afraid to question it, too desperate to hold on to these precious hours before reality came crashing down. When the check finally arrived, Daniel's heart hammered in his chest as he reached for the small black folder with shaking hands. He opened it slowly, preparing himself to see numbers that would destroy him, already forming the words of his confession in his mind. But when he looked down at the receipt, he couldn't make sense of what he was seeing. The total at the bottom read $40 exactly. Not $400, not $300, not even $100, $40. He blinked, certain he was misreading it, but the number remained unchanged. His eyes scanned up the itemized list, and next to each course, each glass of wine, each elaborate dish, the price was listed as $0, with a small note that simply said, "Adjusted." At the very bottom, in handwriting rather than print, someone had written, "Sometimes we all need a little help. Pay it forward when you can." Daniel's vision blurred as tears spilled down his cheeks, his hands trembling so badly that the receipt fluttered like a leaf. Emma reached across the table, alarmed, asking what was wrong, but he couldn't speak, couldn't form words through the overwhelming emotion that was crashing through him. He looked up, searching for the waiter, and found him standing near the kitchen door, watching them. The waiter gave Daniel the smallest nod, then turned and disappeared through the swinging doors. Emma took the receipt from Daniel's shaking hands, and as she read it, understanding dawned across her face. She looked at Daniel, really looked at him, seeing past the suit and the smile to the fear and shame and desperation he'd been carrying. And instead of anger or disappointment, her eyes filled with tears that matched his own. That night, as they walked home through the rain that had softened to a gentle mist, Daniel told Emma everything, about his father's illness, about the money he'd sent, about the fear and shame that had been eating him alive. And Emma stopped right there on the sidewalk, took his face in her hands, and told him that his kindness toward his family, his willingness to sacrifice his own wants for their needs, was exactly why she loved him, why she would always love him, and that she didn't need expensive restaurants to know his worth. She said that what happened tonight wasn't just about some kind waiter. It was about the universe responding to goodness with goodness, about how taking care of the people we love creates ripples that come back to us in unexpected ways. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that kindness still exists in this world, and that sometimes our struggles are seen by people who care enough to help, please show your support by liking this video, leaving a comment telling us about a time someone's kindness changed your life, and sharing this story with anyone who might need to remember that humanity is still beautiful. 2 years later, Daniel returned to Marcello's, but this time he wasn't worried about the bill. He had worked his way up at his firm. His father was in remission, and he had saved carefully for this moment. He requested the same table, and when the same waiter appeared, Daniel handed him an envelope containing $1,000 with a note that read, "For the next person who needs help. Thank you for teaching me what it means to pay it forward." The waiter's eyes misted over as he read the note, and he shook Daniel's hand firmly, telling him that this was how the world healed itself. One act of kindness building upon another, creating a chain of grace that stretched farther than any of them could see. Please comment below and tell us, have you ever experienced or witnessed an unexpected act of kindness that restored your faith in humanity? And as Daniel knelt down beside that same table where Emma sat glowing in her emerald dress, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket, he realized that the greatest gift that waiter had given him wasn't the free meal. It was the reminder that we are all struggling with invisible burdens, that compassion costs nothing but means everything, and that the moments when we help each other through our darkest times are the moments that define what it truly means to be human.